David Williams is a man of curiosity and willpower. A man who, when seeing an opportunity to earn an easy $500 simply by walking through a couple of rooms in a house, jumps at the occasion. An opportunity that David had wished he'd never heard of. For this house is by no means ordinary. This house is unique, dark, and dangerous. Its darkness will reach into your soul and pluck the strings of your mind to a tune of madness. That house is No End House by Brian Russell. Welcome, listeners, and today is an Earl Grey Enforcer episode, so your thanks goes to Chad Warren. And he dedicates this episode to Ashley Warren, which is just lovely to hear. I'm drinking my tea right now in your honor, mate. Thank you so much for supporting this show, mate. It is people like you, Chad, that keep the blood of this podcast pumping. So this episode is recorded with yourself and Ashley Warren in mind. I hope you enjoy it. Now, turn off the lights, turn up the sound, and get ready, just like my enforcers, for something special. Let me start by saying that Peter Terry was addicted to heroin. We were friends in college and continued to be after I graduated. Notice that I said I. He dropped out after 2 years of barely cutting it. After I moved out of the dorms and into a small apartment, I didn't see Peter as much. We would talk online every now and then. AIM was king in pre-Facebook years. There was a period where he wasn't online for about 5 weeks straight. I wasn't worried. He was a pretty notorious flake and drug addict, so I assumed he just stopped caring. Then one night, I saw him log on. Before I could initiate a conversation, he sent me a message. "David, man, we need to talk." That was when he told me about the No End House. It got that name because no one had ever reached the final exit. The rules were pretty simple and cliché. Reach the final room of the building and you win $500. There were 9 rooms in all. The house was located outside the city, roughly 4 miles from my house. Apparently Peter had tried and failed. He was a heroin and who knows what the fuck addict. So I figured the drugs got the best of him, and he wigged out as a paper ghost or something. He told me it would be too much for anyone, that it was unnatural. I didn't believe him. I told him I would check it out the next night, and no matter how hard he tried to convince me otherwise, $500 sounded too good to be true. I had to go. I set out the following night. When I arrived, I immediately noticed something strange about the building. Have you ever seen or read something that shouldn't be scary, but for some reason, a chill crawls up your spine? I walked toward the building, and the feeling of uneasiness only intensified as I opened up the front door. My heart slowed, and I let a relieved sigh leave me as I entered. The room looked like a normal hotel lobby, decorated for Halloween. A sign was posted in place of a worker. It read, "Room 1 this way, 8 more follow. Reach the end and you win." I chuckled and made my way to the first door. The first area was almost laughable. The decor resembled the Halloween aisle of a Kmart, complete with sheet ghosts and animatronic zombies that gave a static growl when you passed by. At the far end was an exit. It was the only door besides the one I entered through. I brushed through the fake spiderwebs and headed for the second room. I was greeted by fog as I opened the door to room 2. The room definitely upped the ante in terms of technology. Not only was there a fog machine, but a bat hung from the ceiling and flew in a circle. Scary! They seemed to have a Halloween soundtrack that one would find in a 99-cent store on loop somewhere in the room. I didn't see a stereo, but I guess they must have used a PA system. I stepped over a few toy rats that wheeled around and walked with a puffed chest across to the next area. I reached for the doorknob, and my heart sank to my knees. I did not want to open that door. A feeling of dread hit me so hard I could barely even think. Logic overtook me after a few terrified moments, and I shook it off and entered the room. Room 3 is when things began to change. On the surface, it looked like a normal room. There was a chair in the middle of the wood-paneled floor. A single lamp in the corner did a poor job of lighting the area, casting a few shadows across the floor and walls. That was the problem. Shadows. Plural. With the exception of the chairs, there were others. I had barely walked in the door, and I was already terrified. It was at that moment that I knew something wasn't right. I didn't think, as I automatically tried to open the door that I came through. Shit. It was locked from the other side. That set me off. Was someone locking the doors as I progressed? There was no way I would have heard them. Was it a mechanical lock that set automatically? Maybe. But I was too scared to really think. I turned back to the room, and the shadows were gone. The chair's shadow remained, but the others were gone. I slowly began to walk. So I wrote off the shadows as a figment of my imagination. I used to hallucinate as a kid. I began to feel better as I made it to the halfway point of the room. I looked down as I took my steps, and that's when I saw it. Or didn't see it. My shadow wasn't there. I didn't have time to scream. I ran as fast as I could to the other door and flung myself without thinking into the room beyond. The fourth room was possibly the most disturbing. As I closed the door, all light seemed to be sucked out and put back into the previous room. I stood there, surrounded by darkness, not able to move. I'm not afraid of the dark. I never have been. But I was absolutely terrified. All sight had left me. I held my hand in front of my face, and if I didn't know what I was doing, I would never have been able to tell. Darkness doesn't describe it. I couldn't hear anything. It was dead silence. When you're in a soundproof room, you can still hear yourself breathing. You can hear yourself being alive. I couldn't. I began to stumble forward after a few moments, my rapidly beating heart the only thing I could feel. There was no door in sight. Wasn't even sure there was one this time. The silence was then broken by a low hum. I felt something behind me. I spun around wildly, but could barely even see my nose. I knew it was there, though. Regardless of how dark it was, I knew something was there. The hum grew louder, closer. It seemed to surround me, but I knew whatever was causing the noise was in front of me, inching closer. I took a step back. I had never felt that kind of fear. I can't really describe true fear. I wasn't even scared I was going to die. I was scared of what the alternative was. I was afraid of what this thing had in store for me. Then the lights flashed for a second, and I saw it. Nothing. I saw nothing. And I know I saw nothing there. The room was again plunged into darkness, and the hum became a wild screech. I screamed in protest. I couldn't hear this goddamn sound for another minute. I ran backwards, away from the noise, and fumbled for the door handle. I turned and fell into room 5. Before I describe room 5, you have to understand something. I am not a drug addict. I have had no history of drug abuse or any sort of psychosis short of the childhood hallucinations I mentioned earlier, and those were only when I was really tired or just waking up. I entered the no-end house with a clear head. After falling in from the previous room, my view of room 5 was from my back, looking up at the ceiling. What I saw didn't scare me. It simply surprised me. Trees had grown into the room and towered above my head. The ceilings in this room were taller than the others, which made me think I was in the center of the house. I got up off the floor, dusted myself off, and took a look around. It was definitely the biggest room of them all. I couldn't even see the door from where I was. Various brush and trees must have blocked my line of sight with the exit. Up to this point, I figured the rooms were going to get scarier, but this was a paradise compared to the last room. I also assumed whatever was in room 4 stayed back there. I was incredibly wrong. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to hear what one would hear if they were in a forest. Chirping bugs and the occasional flap of birds seemed to be my only company in this room. That was the thing that bothered me the most. I heard the bugs and other animals, but I didn't see any of them. I began to wonder how big this house was. From the outside, when I first walked up to it, it looked like a regular house. It was definitely on the bigger side, but this was almost a full forest in here. The canopy covered my view of the ceiling, but I assumed it was still there, however high it was. I couldn't see any walls either. The only way I knew I was still inside was that the floor matched the other rooms, the standard dark wood paneling. I kept walking, hoping that the next tree I passed would reveal the door. After a few moments of walking, I felt a mosquito fly onto my arm. I shook it off and kept going. A second later, I felt about 10 more land on my skin at different places. I felt them crawl up and down my arms and legs, and a few made their way across my face. I flailed wildly to get them all off, but they just kept crawling. I looked down and let out a muffled scream. More of a whimper, to be honest. I didn't see a single bug, but not one bug was on me. But I could feel them crawl. I heard them fly by my face and sting my skin, but I couldn't see a single one. I dropped to the ground and began to roll wildly. I was desperate. I hated bugs, especially ones I couldn't see or touch. But these bugs could touch me, and they were everywhere. I began to crawl. I had no idea where I was going. The entrance was nowhere in sight, and I still hadn't even seen the exit. So I just crawled, my skin crawling with the presence of those phantom bugs. After what seemed like hours, I found the door. I grabbed the nearest tree and propped myself up, mindlessly slapping my arms and legs to no avail. I tried to run, but I couldn't. My body was exhausted from crawling and dealing with whatever it was that was on me. I took a few shaky steps to the door, grabbing each tree on the way for support. It was only a few feet away when I heard it, the low hum from before. It was coming from the next room, and it was deeper. I could almost feel it inside my body, like when you stand up next to an amp at a concert. The feeling of the bugs on me lessened as the hum grew louder. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, the bugs became completely gone. But I couldn't bring myself to turn the knob. I knew that if I let go, the bugs would return, and there was no way I would make it back to room 4. I just stood there, my head pressed against the door marked 6, and my hand shakily grasping the knob. The hum was so loud, I couldn't even hear myself pretend to think. There was nothing I could do but move on. Room 6 was next, and room 6 was hell. I closed the door behind me, my eyes held shut and my ears ringing. The hum was surrounding me. As the doors clicked into place, the hum was gone. I opened my eyes in surprise, and the door that I shut was gone. It was just a wall now. I looked around in shock. The room was identical to room 3, the same chair and lamp, but with the correct amount of shadows this time. The only real difference was that there was no exit door, and the one I came in through was gone. As I said before, I had no previous issues in terms of mental instability, but at that moment, I fell into what I now know was insanity. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. At first, I scratched softly. The wall was tough. But I knew the door was there somewhere. I just knew it was. I scratched at where the doorknob was. I clawed at the wall, frantically with both hands, my nails being filed down to the skin against the wood. I fell silently to my knees. The only sound in the room, the incessant scratching against the wall. I knew it was there. The door was there. I knew it was just there. I knew if I could just get past this wall.
Are you alright?
I jumped off the ground and spun in one motion. I leaned against the wall behind me, and I saw what it was that spoke to me. To this day, I regret ever turning around. There was a little girl. She was wearing a soft white dress that went down to her ankles. She had long blonde hair to the middle of her back and white skin and blue eyes. She was the most frightening thing I had ever seen, and I know that nothing in my life will ever be as unnerving as what I saw in her. While looking at her, I saw something else. Where she stood, I saw what looked like a man's body, only larger than normal and covered in hair. He was naked from head to toe, but his head was not human, and his toes were hooves. It wasn't the devil, but at that moment, it might as well have been. The form had the head of a ram and the snout of a wolf. It was horrifying, and it was synonymous with the little girl in front of me. They were the same form. I can't really describe it, but I saw them at the same time. They shared the same spot in that room. But it was like looking at two separate dimensions. When I saw the girl, I saw the form. And when I saw the form, I saw the girl. I couldn't speak. I could barely even see. My mind was revolting against what it was attempting to process. I had been scared before in my life, and I had never been more scared than when I was trapped in the 4th room. But that was before room 6. I just stood there, staring at whatever it was that spoke to me. There was no exit. I was trapped here with it, and then it spoke again.
David, you should have listened.
When it spoke, I heard the words of the little girl, but the other form spoke through my mind, in a voice I won't attempt to describe. There was no other sound. The voice just kept repeating that sentence over and over in my mind, and I agreed. I didn't know what to do. I was slipping into madness, yet couldn't take my eyes off what was in front of me. I dropped to the floor. I thought I'd passed out, but the room wouldn't let me. I just wanted it to end. I was on my side, my eyes wide open, and the form staring down at me, scurrying across the floor in front of me, was one of the battery-powered rats from the 2nd room. The house was toying with me. For some reason, seeing that rat pulled my mind back from whatever depths it was headed, and I looked around the room. I was getting out of there. I was determined to get out of that house and live and never think about this place again. I knew this room was hell, and I wasn't ready to take up a residency. At first, it was just my eyes that moved. I searched the walls for any kind of opening. Where is it? Where could it be? Where is it? The room wasn't that big, so it didn't take long to soak up the entire layout. The demon still taunted me, the voice growing louder as the form stayed rooted where it stood. I placed my hand on the floor, lifted myself up to all 4, and turned to scan the wall behind me. Then I saw something I couldn't believe. The form was now right at my back, whispering into my mind how I shouldn't have come. I felt its breath on the back of my neck, but I refused to turn around. A large rectangle was scratched into the wood, with a small dent chipped away in the center of it. Right in front of my eyes, I saw the large 7 I had mindlessly etched into the wall. I knew what it was. Room 7 was just beyond that wall, where room 5 was moments ago. I don't know how I had done it. Maybe it was just my state of mind at the time. But I had created the door. I knew I had. In my madness, I had scratched into the wall what I needed the most, an exit to the next room. Room 7 was close. I knew the demon was right behind me, but for some reason, it couldn't touch me. I closed my eyes and placed both hands on the large 7 in front of me. I pushed. I pushed as hard as I could. The demon was now screaming in my ear. It told me I was never leaving here. It told me that this was the end, but I wasn't going to die. I was going to live there in room 6 with it. I wasn't. I pushed and screamed at the top of my lungs. I knew I was going to push through the wall eventually. I clenched my eyes shut and screamed and the demon was gone. I was left in silence. I turned around slowly and was greeted by the room as it was when I entered. Just a chair and a lamp. I couldn't believe it. But I didn't have time to dwell. I turned back to the 7 and jumped back slightly. What I saw was a door. It wasn't the one I'd scratched in, but a regular door with a large 7 on it. My whole body was shaking. It took me a while to turn the knob. I just stood there for a while, staring at the door. I couldn't stay in room 6, I couldn't. But if this was only room 6, I couldn't imagine what 7 had in store. I must have stood there for an hour, just staring at the 7. Finally, with a deep breath, I twisted the knob and opened the door to room 7. I stumbled through the door, mentally exhausted and physically weak. The door behind me closed, and I realized where I was. I was outside. Not outside like room 5, but actually outside. My eyes stung. I wanted to cry. I fell to my knees and tried, but I couldn't. I was finally out of that hell. I didn't even care about the prize that was promised. I turned and saw that the door I just went through was the entrance. I walked to my car and drove home, thinking of how nice a shower sounded. As I pulled up to my house, I felt uneasy. The joy of leaving No End House had faded, and dread was slowly building in my stomach. I shook it off as residual from the house and made my way to the front door. I entered and immediately went up to my room. There, on my bed, was my cat, Baskerville. He was the first living thing I had seen all night, and I reached to pet him. He hissed and swiped at my hand. I recoiled in shock, as he had never acted like that. I thought, whatever, he's an old cat. I jumped in the shower and got ready for what I was expecting to be a sleepless night. After my shower, I went to the kitchen to make something to eat. I descended the stairs and turned into the family room. What I saw would be forever burned into my mind, however. My parents were lying on the ground, naked and covered in blood. They were mutilated to near unidentifiable states. Their limbs were removed and placed next to their bodies, and their heads were placed on their chests, facing me. The most unsettling part was their expressions. They were smiling, as though they were happy to see me. I vomited and sobbed there in the family room. I didn't know what was happening. They didn't even live with me at the time. I was a mess. Then I saw it, a door that was never there before. A door with a large 8 scrawled on it in blood. I was still in the house. I was standing in my family room, but I was in room 7. The faces of my parents smiled wider as I realized this. They weren't my parents. They couldn't be. But they looked exactly like them. The door marked 8 was across the room, behind the mutilated bodies in front of me. I knew I had to move on, but at that moment, I gave up. The smiling faces tore into my mind. They grounded me where I stood. I vomited again and nearly collapsed. Then the hum returned. It was louder than ever, and it filled the house and shook the walls. The hum compelled me to walk. I began to walk slowly, making my way closer to the door and the bodies. I could barely stand, let alone walk, and the closer I got to my parents, the closer I came to suicide. The walls were now shaking so hard, it seemed as though they were going to crumble. But still, the faces smiled at me. As I inched closer, their eyes followed me. I was now between the 2 bodies, a few feet away from the door. The dismembered hand clawed their way across the carpet towards me. All the while, the faces continued to stare. New terror washed over me, and I walked faster. I didn't want to hear them speak. I didn't want the voices to match those of my parents. They began to open their mouths, and the hands were inches from my feet. In a dash of desperation, I lunged towards the door, threw it open, and slammed it behind me. Room 8. I was done. After what I had just experienced, I knew there wasn't anything else this fucking house could throw at me that I couldn't live through. There was nothing short of the fires of hell that I wasn't ready for. Unfortunately, I underestimated the abilities of No End House. Unfortunately, things got more disturbing, more terrifying. and more unspeakable in room 8. I still have trouble believing what I saw in room 8. Again, this room was a carbon copy of room 3 and 6, but sitting in the usual empty chair was a man. After a few seconds of disbelief, my mind finally accepted the fact that the man sitting in the chair was me. Not someone who looked like me. It was David Williams. I walked closer. I had to get a better look, even though I was sure of it. He looked up at me, and I noticed tears in his eyes. "Please, please don't do it. Please, don't hurt me." "What?" I asked. "Who are you? I'm not going to hurt you." "Yes, you are." He was sobbing now. "You're going to hurt me, and I don't want you to." He sat in the chair with his legs up and began rocking back and forth. It was actually pretty pathetic looking, especially since he was me, identical in every way. "Listen, whoever you are." I was now only a few feet from my doppelganger. It was the weirdest experience yet, standing there talking to myself. I wasn't scared, but I would be soon. "Why are you? You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. If you want to leave, you're going to have to hurt me." "Why are you saying this? Just calm down, alright? Let's try and figure this." And then I saw it. The David sitting down was wearing the same clothes as me, except for a small red patch on his shirt, embroidered with the number 9. "You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. Don't, please. You're going to hurt me." My eyes didn't leave that small number on his chest. I knew exactly what it was. The first few doors were plain and simple, but after a while they got a little more ambiguous. 7 was scratched into the wall, but by my own hands. 8 was marked in blood above the bodies of my parents, but 9? This number was on a person, a living person. Worse still, it was on a person that looked exactly like me. "David," I had to ask. "Yes? You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me." He continued to sob and rock. He answered to David. He was me, right down to the voice. By that 9, I paced around for a few minutes while he sobbed in his chair. The room had no door, and, similarly to room 6, the door I came through was gone. For some reason, I assumed that scratching would get me nowhere this time. I studied the walls and floor around the chair, sticking my head underneath and seeing if anything was below. Unfortunately, there was. Below the chair was a knife, attached with a tag that read, "To David, from management." The feeling in my stomach as I read that tag was something sinister. I wanted to throw up, and the last thing I wanted to do was remove the knife from under that chair. The other David was still sobbing uncontrollably. My mind was spinning into an attic of unanswerable questions. Who put this here, and how did they get my name? Not to mention the fact that as I knelt on the cold wood floor, I also sat in that chair, sobbing in protest of being hurt by myself. It was all too much to process. The house and the management had been playing with me this whole time. My thoughts for some reason turned to Peter, and whether or not he got this far. If he did, if he met a Peter Terry sobbing in this very chair, rocking back and forth, I shook those thoughts out of my head. They didn't matter. I took the knife from under the chair, and immediately the other David went quiet. "David," he said in my voice, "what do you think you're going to do?" I lifted myself from the ground and clenched the knife in my hand. "I'm going to get out of here." David was still sitting in the chair, though he was very calm now. He looked at me with a slight grin. I couldn't tell if he was going to laugh or strangle me. Slowly, he got up from the chair and stood, facing me. It was uncanny. His height, and even the way he stood, matched mine. I felt the rubber hilt of the knife in my hand and gripped it tighter. I don't know what I was planning on doing with it, but I had a feeling I was going to need it. "Now," his voice was slightly deeper than my own, "I'm going to hurt you and I'm going to keep you here." I didn't respond. I just lunged and tackled him to the ground. I had mounted him and looked down, knife poised and ready. He looked up at me, terrified. It was like I was looking in a mirror. Then the hum returned, low and distant, though I still felt it deep in my body. David looked up at me as I looked down at myself. The hum was getting louder, and I felt something inside me snap. With one motion, I slammed the knife into the patch on his chest and ripped down. Blackness fell on the room, and I was falling. The darkness around me was like nothing I'd experienced up to that point. Room 4 was darkness, but it didn't come close to what was completely engulfing me. I wasn't even sure if I was falling after a while. I felt weightless, covered in dark. Then a deep sadness came over me. I felt lost, depressed, suicidal. The sight of my parents entered my mind. I knew it wasn't real, but I had seen it, and the mind has trouble differentiating between what is real and what isn't. The sadness only deepened. I was in room 9 for what seemed like days. The final room. And that's exactly what it was. The end. No End House had an end, and I had reached it. At that moment, I gave up. I knew I would be in that in-between state forever, accompanied by nothing but darkness. Not even the hum was there to keep me sane. I had lost all senses. I couldn't feel myself. I couldn't hear anything. Sight was completely useless here. I searched for a taste in my mouth and found nothing. I felt disembodied and completely lost. I knew where I was. This was hell. Room 9 was hell. Then it happened. A light. One of those stereotypical lights at the end of the tunnel. I felt ground come up from below me, and I was standing. After a moment or two of gathering my thoughts and senses, I slowly walked towards that light. As I approached the light, it took form. It was a vertical slit down the side of an unmarked door. I slowly walked through the door and found myself back where I started. The lobby of No End House. It was exactly how I left it. Still empty, still decorated with childish Halloween decorations. After everything that had happened that night, I was still wary of where I was. After a few moments of normalcy, I looked around the place trying to find anything different. On the desk was a plain white envelope, with my name handwritten on it. Immensely curious yet still cautious, I mustered up the courage to open the envelope. Inside was a letter, again, handwritten. David Williams, congratulations! You have made it to the end of No End House. Please accept this prize as a token of great achievement. Yours forever, Management. With the letter were 5 $100 bills. I couldn't stop laughing. I laughed for what seemed like hours. I laughed as I walked out to my car and laughed as I drove home. I laughed as I pulled into my driveway. I laughed as I opened my front door to my house. And I laughed as I saw the small 10 etched into the wood. A man loses his wife and goes wild with grief, but does manage to keep his daughter's love. But when he overcomes that grief, he may have lost sight and grip of what he loves the most. And a tea kettle is found by an enterprising priest, leading to a funny and remarkable tale. Welcome, you awesome listeners. Crank up the sound and get ready to relax with 2 Japanese folk tales. Before we jump in, a huge thank you to my latest Earl Grey Enforcer, Lee Bauer. I'm drinking my Earl Grey right now, and from my tea-infused heart. Thank you so much. Also, an honorable mention to Christina Siebold, who has been listening non-stop, it appears, to this podcast. I really do have the best listeners. Now, let's get to some tales, mates. The Flute. Long since there lived in Yiro a gentleman of good lineage and very honest conversation. His wife was a gentle and loving lady. To his secret grief, she bore him no sons, but a daughter she did give him, whom they called Oyone, which, being interpreted directly, is rice in the ear. Each of them loved this child more than life, and guarded her as the apple of their eye, and the child grew up red and white and long-eyed, straight and slender as the green bamboo. When Oyone was 12 years old, her mother dropped with the fall of the year, sickened and pinned, and ere the red had faded from the leaves of the maples, she was dead, and shrouded and laid in the earth. The husband was wild in his grief. He cried aloud. He beat his breast. He lay upon the ground and refused comfort. And for days he neither broke his fast nor slept. The child was quite silent. Time passed by. The man pre-falls went about his business. The snows of winter fell and covered his wife's grave. The beaten pathway from his house to the dwelling of the dead was snow also, undisturbed save for the faint prints of a child's sandaled feet. In the springtime he girded up his robe and went forth to see the cherry blossom, making merry enough and writing a poem upon gilded paper, which he hung to a cherry tree branch to flutter in the wind. The poem was in praise of the spring and of the sake. Later he planted the orange lily of forgetfulness and thought of his wife no more. But the child remembered. Before the year was out, he brought a new bride home, a woman with a fair face and a black heart. But the man, poor fool, was happy, and commended his child to her, and believed that all was well. Now, because her father loved Oyone, her stepmother hated her with jealousy and deadly hatred, and every day she dealt cruelly by the child, whose gentle ways and patience only angered her the more. But because of her father's presence, she did not dare to do Oyone any great ill. Therefore she waited, biding her time. The poor child passed her days and nights in torment and horrible fear, but of these things she said not a word to her father. Such is the manner of children. Now, after some time, it chanced that the man was called away by his business to a distant city. Kyoto was the name of the city, and from Yedo it is many days' journey on foot or on horseback. Howbeit goes the man, needs must, and stay there 3 moons or more. Therefore he made ready, and equipped himself and his servants that were to go with him, with all things needful, and so came to the last night before his departure, which was to be very early in the morning. He called Oyone to him and said,
"Come here then, my dear little daughter."
So Oyone went and knelt before him.
"What gift shall I bring you home from Kyoto?"
he said, but she hung her head and did not answer.
"Answer then, rude little one,"
he bade her.
"Shall it be a golden fan, or a new orby of red brocade, or a great battledore with images upon it, and many light-feathered shuttlecocks?"
Then she burst into bitter weeping, and he took her upon his knee to soothe her, but she hid her face with her sleeves and cried as if her heart would break, and said, "Oh, father, father, father," she said, "do not go away."
"But my sweet, I needs must,"
he answered,
"and soon I shall be back, so soon, scarcely it will seem that I am gone, when I shall be here again, with fair gifts in my hand."
"Father, take me with you," she said.
"Alas, what a great way for a little girl. Will you walk on your feet, my little pilgrim, or mount a pack horse? How would you fare in the inns of Kyoto? Nay, my dear, stay. It is but for a little time, and your kind mother will be with you."
She shuddered in his arms. "Father, if you go, you will never see me more." Then the father felt a sudden chill about his heart that gave him pause, but he would not heed it. What, must he, a strong man grown, be swayed by a child's fancies? He put Oyone gently from him, and she slipped away as silently as a shadow. But in the morning she came to him before sunrise, with a little flute in her hand, fashioned of bamboo and smoothly polished. "I made it myself," she said, "from a bamboo in the grove that is behind our garden. I made it for you. As you cannot take me with you, take the little flute, honorable father. Play on it sometimes if you will, and think of me." Then she wrapped it in a handkerchief of white silk, lined with scarlet, and wound a scarlet cord about it. and gave it to her father, who put it in his sleeve. After this he departed and went his way, taking the road to Kyoto. As he went, he looked back thrice, and beheld his child, standing at the gate, looking after him. Then the road turned, and he saw her no more. The city of Kyoto was passing great and beautiful, and so the father of Ione found it, and what with his business during the day, which sped very well, and his pleasure in the evening, and his sound sleep at night, the time passed merrily, and small thought he gave to Yedo, to his home, or to his child. 2 moons passed, and 3, and he made no plans for return. One evening he was making ready to go forth to get a great supper of his friends, and as he searched in his chest for certain brave silken hakama, which he intended to wear as a honor to the feast, he came upon the little flute, which had lain hidden all this time in the sleeve of his travelling dress. He drew it forth from its red and white handkerchief, and as he did so, felt strangely cold with an icy chill that crept about his heart. He hung over the live charcoal of the hibichi as one in a dream. He put the flute to his lips, where there came from it a long-drawn wail. He dropped it hastily upon the mats and clapped his hands for his servant, and told him he would not go forth that night. He was not well. He would be alone. After a long time he reached out his hand for the flute. Again that long, melancholy cry. He shook from head to foot, but he blew into the flute. "Come back to Yedo. Come back to Yedo. Come back to Yedo. Father! Father!" The quivering childish voice rose to a shriek and then broke. A horrible foreboding now took possession of the man, and he was as one beside himself. He flung himself from the house and from the city, and journeyed day and night, denying himself sleep and food. So pale was he and wild, that the people deemed him a madman and fled from him, or pitied him as the afflicted of the gods. At last he came to his journey's end, travel-stained from head to heel, with bleeding feet, and half dead of weariness. His wife met him in the gate. He said,
"Where is the child?"
The child?
She answered,
The child. My child. Where is she? Where is she?"
he cried in an agony. The woman laughed.
"Nay, my lord, how should I know? She is within at her books, or she is in the garden, or she is asleep, or mayhap she has gone forth with her playmates, or—"
"Enough! No more of this. Come, where is my child?"
Then she was afraid, and said,
"In the bamboo grove,"
she said, looking at him with wide eyes. There the man ran and sought Oyone among the green stems of the bamboos, but he did not find her. He called, "Yone! Yone!" and again, "Yone! Yone!" but he had no answer. Only the wind sighed in the dry bamboo leaves. Then he felt his sleeve, and brought forth the little flute, and very tenderly put it to his lips. There was a faint sighing sound. Then a voice spoke, thin and pitiful.
"Father, dear father, my wicked stepmother killed me. 3 moons since she killed me. She buried me in the clearing of the bamboo grove. You may find my bones. As for me, you will never see me more."
With his own 2-handed sword, the man did justice, and slew his wicked wife, avenging the death of his innocent child. Then he dressed himself in a coarse white raiment, with a great rice straw hat that shadowed his face, and he took a staff and a straw raincoat, and bound sandals on his feet, and thus he set forth upon a pilgrimage to the holy places of Japan. And he carried the little flute with him in a fold of his garment upon his breast. The Tea Kettle and the Tinker. Long ago, As I've heard tell, there dwelt at the temple of Morinji, in the province of Kotsuki, was a holy priest. Now there were 3 things about this reverend man. First, he was wrapped up in meditations and observances and forms and doctrines. He was a great one for the sacred sutras, and knew strange and mystical things. Then he had a fine, exquisite taste of his own, and nothing pleased him so much as the ancient tea ceremony of the Cha no Yu. And for the third thing about him, he knew both sides of a copper coin well enough and loved a bargain. None so pleased as he when he happened upon an ancient tea kettle lying rusty and dirty and half forgotten in a corner of a poor shop in a back street of his town.
An ugly bit of old metal,
says the holy man to the shopkeeper.
but it will do well enough to boil my humble drop of water of an evening. I'll give you 3 rin for it.
This he did and took the kettle home, rejoicing, for it was of bronze and fine work, the very thing for the Cha no Yu. A novice cleaned and scoured the tea kettle, and it came out as pretty as you please. The priest turned it this way and that, and upside down, looked into it, tapped it with his fingernail, and smiled. "A bargain!" he cried. "A bargain!" and rubbed his hands. He set the kettle upon a box covered over with a purple cloth, and looked at it so long that first he was fain to rub his eyes many times, and then to close them altogether. His head dropped forward, and he slept. And then, believe me, the wonderful thing happened. The tea kettle moved, though no hand was near it. A hairy head with 2 bright eyes looked out of the spout. The lid jumped up and down. 4 brown and hairy paws appeared, and a fine bushy tail. In a minute, the kettle was down from the box and going round and round, looking at things. "A very comfortable room, to be sure," says the kettle. Pleased enough to find itself so well lodged, it soon began to dance and to caper nimbly, and to sing at the top of its voice. 3 novices were studying in the next room. "The old man is lively," they said. "Only hark to him. What can he be at?" And they laughed in their sleeves. Heaven's mercy! The noise that the tea kettle made! Bang, bang, thud, thud, thud! The novices soon stopped laughing. One of them slid aside the karakami and peeped through.
"Ara! The devil and all's in it! The master's old tea kettle's turned into some sort of badger. The gods protect us from witchcraft, or for certain we shall be lost."
"And I scoured it not an hour since," said another novice, and he fell to reciting the Holy Sutras on his knees. A third laughed. "I'm for a nearer view of the hobgoblin. Let's take a look," he said. So, the lot of them left their books in a twinkling, and gave chase to the tea kettle to catch it. But could they come up with the tea kettle? Not a bit of it. It danced and it leapt and it flew up into the air. The novices rushed here and there, slipping upon the mats. They grew hot. They grew breathless. Laughed the wonderful tea kettle. Presently the priest awoke, all rosy, the holy man.
What's the meaning of this racket?"
he says, "disturbing me at my holy meditations and all." Master, cried the novices, panting and mopping their brows. "Your tea kettle is bewitched. It was a badger, no less, and the dance it's been giving us, you'd never believe."
"Stuff and nonsense,"
says the priest.
"Bewitched?
Not a bit of it. There it rests on its box, good quiet thing, just where I put it." Sure enough, so it did. Looking as hard and cold and innocent as you please, there was not a hair of a badger near it. It was the novices that looked foolish. "A likely story indeed," says the priest. "I have heard of the pestle that took wing to itself and flew away, parting company with the mortar. That is easily to be understood by any man. But a kettle that turned into a badger? No. To your books, my sons, and pray to be preserved from the perils of illusion." That very night the holy man filled the kettle with water from the spring, and set it on the hibachi to boil for his cup of tea. When the water began to boil, "Ah!" the kettle cried, "the heat of the great hell!" And it lost no time at all, but hopped off the fire as quick as you please.
"Sorcery!"
cried the priest.
"Black magic! A devil! Mercy on me!"
Help! Help! He was frightened out of his wits. The dear good man. All the novices came running to see what was the matter.
The tea kettle! It's bewitched!
He gasped.
It was a badger, assuredly it was a badger. It both speaks and leaps about the room. Nay, master,
said a novice.
See where it rests upon its box? Good quiet thing.
And sure enough, so it did.
Most reverend sir,
said the novice,
let us all pray to be preserved from the perils of illusion.
The priest sold the tea kettle to a tinkerer and got for it 20 copper coins.
It's a mighty fine bit of bronze,
says the priest.
Mind I'm giving it away to you. I'm sure I cannot tell what for.
He was the one for a bargain. The tinkerer was a happy man, and carried home the kettle. He turned it this way and that, and upside down, and looked into it. A pretty piece, says the tinkerer. A very good bargain. And when he went to bed that night, he put the kettle by him, to see it first thing in the morning. He awoke at midnight, and fell to looking at the kettle by the bright light of the moon. Presently it moved, though there was no hand near it. Strange, said the tinker. But he was a man who took things as they came. A hairy head with 2 bright eyes looked out of the kettle's spout. The lid jumped up and down. 4 brown and hairy paws appeared, and a fine bushy tail. It came quite close to the tinker, and laid a paw upon him. Well, says the tinker. I am not wicked, says the tea kettle. No, I don't think you are, says the tinker. But I like to be well treated. I am a badger tea kettle. So it seems. At the temple they call me names, and beat me and set me on fire. I couldn't stand it, you know.
I like your spirit.
I think I shall settle down with you.
Shall I keep you in a lacquer box? Says the tinker.
Not a bit of it. Keep me with you. Let us have a talk now and again. I am very fond of a pipe. I like rice to eat and beans and sweet things.
A cup of sake sometimes? Says the tinker.
Well, yes, now that you mention it.
I'm willing, says the tinker.
Thank you kindly,
says the tea kettle.
And as a beginning, would you object to my sharing your bed? The night has turned a little chilly.
Not the least in the world, says the tinker. The tinker and the tea kettle became the best of friends. They ate and talked together. The kettle knew a thing or two and was very good company. One day,
Tinker, are you poor?
Says the kettle. Yes, I am. Middling poor, I'm afraid.
Well, I have a happy thought. For a tea kettle, I am out of the way, really very accomplished.
I believe you, says the tinker.
My name is Bambuku Tagama. I am the very prince of badger tea kettles.
Your servant, my lord, says the tinker.
If you'll take my advice, you'll carry me around and show me all about town. I really am out of the way, and it's my opinion you'd make a mint of money.
That would be hard work for you, my dear Bambuku, says the tinker.
Not at all. Let us start forthwith.
So they did. The tinker bought hangings for a theatre, and he called the show Bambuku Chagama. How the people flocked to see the fun, for the wonderful and most accomplished tea kettle danced and sang, and walked the tightrope, as to the manner born. It had such tricks and such droll ways, that the people laughed till their sides ached. It was a treat to see the tea kettle bow as gracefully as a lord, and thank the people for their patience. The Bambuku Chagama was the talk of the countryside, and all the gentry came to see it as well as the commonalty. As for the tinker, he waved a fan and took the money. You may believe that he grew fat and rich. He even went to court where the great ladies and the royal princesses made much of the wonderful tea kettle. At last the tinker retired from business, and to him the tea kettle came with tears in his bright eyes.
I'm much afraid it's time to leave you,
it says. Now don't say that, Bambuku dear, says the tinker. We'll be so happy together now we are rich.
I have come to the end of my time,
says the tea kettle.
you'll not see old Bambuku any more. Henceforth, I shall be an ordinary kettle. Nothing more or less. Fare thee well."
"Oh, my dear Bumbuku, what shall I do?" cried the poor tinker in tears.
"I think I should like to be given to the temple of Morinji as a very sacred treasure," says the tea kettle.
And after that moment, it never spoke or moved again. So the tinker presented it as a very sacred treasure to the temple, and the half of its wealth with it. And the tea kettle was held in wondrous fame for many a long year. Some persons even worshipped it as a saint to this day. There is something about Japanese folk tales that I love. I want to use the word clean, but that isn't quite right. Maybe they're direct? It's very easy to understand the motives of a character, their behavior. Maybe I don't agree with the character's choice, but you can still see how or why a person does what they do in a story. In Japanese folklore, there tends to be that simplification, an easy to follow narrative that other stories just don't have, and I put that down to the culture and the style of narrative written during that time. As a result, we get a little time capsule of what it was like back then, and the kind of interest that authors had when writing their narratives. That is something that I really enjoy in these kinds of tales. Mates, stick with me Friday, you lovelies, and I'll have a set of stories to sneak under your skin. And as always, till next we meet.